Democrats are waging war on Trump's high court pick. Issues like abortion and health care have already mobilized a lot of concern on the left. But now, the Democrats' opening punch goes farther than policy, alleging Donald Trump may have made this pick with corrupt intent, building a kind of a wall to defend himself against further problems or even prosecution in the Mueller probe. Now, before we go any further, let's be clear. Even for a president who's been credibly accused of meddling in open criminal investigations, this new charge from Democrats is serious. It requires evidence to be taken seriously, but it also shows the unusual era we are living in right now and clearly the intensity of many Democrats' opposition to this new nominee, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who's making his way to Capitol Hill today for meetings, working on the nomination, all amidst reports that millions will be spent on this fight. Now, Kavanaugh is known for scholarly and strongly conservative opinions, including sometimes breaking with his own colleagues to stake out positions that are seen as conservative and pro-life. But what's interesting tonight is Democrats not only looking at his ideology, but to his alleged partisanship. The line of attack is that his views may just shift based on what the Republican Party wants. Democrats say Kavanaugh was a slashing partisan prosecutor when he worked for controversial independent counsel Ken Starr investigating Bill Clinton. That was an entire probe, of course, built on the premise that a president can be investigated while in office, and which featured Kavanaugh saying he was strongly opposed to giving the president any break. But after that case led to the impeachment of a yes Democratic president, Kavanaugh moved on to a position welcomed by Trump allies today, writing, "Presidents should generally be exempted while in office from criminal investigations," and testifying along similar lines.
Impeachment and then conviction take into account more than just the facts. It wasn't just a simple question of whether there was a violation of law committed, but there were broader considerations for the country.
That is all the kind of ammunition Democrats are seizing on right now.
The thing the president is most obsessed with is the Mueller investigation, and Kavanaugh is the strongest against such an investigation.
He thinks that Congress should pass specific legislation to insulate the president from either criminal or civil processes while in office.
This seems to be, of all the people, the most self-serving person he could choose in order to protect himself from this criminal investigation.
A Senate Democrat and former prosecutor himself, Richard Blumenthal, will join me in just a moment on all this. But first, I want to bring in Attorney Vince Warren, who runs the Center for Constitutional Rights, former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams, and Elise Hogue, president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, which works with Planned Parenthood. Let me start with you. Is this the right tack?
There's a lot of reasons to go after this nominee, potentially. And given the length of his paper trail, and given all that might be found when the Democrats actually do take a look at it, certainly they should take a look at his partisan background. Every partisan fight over potentially the last 10 or 20 years, if you notice, he's been a bit player or a player to it. So potentially that could be Bush versus Gore. That could be questions over interrogation and detention. And all of these are going to show up in his record. So certainly it behooves the Democrats in the Senate to take a close look at his record and really see what they can find.
As a lawyer, I can't help but observe you didn't really answer the question. Is this attack that he is a rank partisan Republican the right place to start? Yes or no?
It is a place to start.
It is a place to start.
And it is a
Moving on,
inquiry.
Vince, same question for you. And I know there's certain issues that your organization works on. And I should mention full disclosure, many years ago I worked there at the Center for Constitutional Rights. But is this the right place to start?
I think it is the right place to start. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Number one is that when Donald Trump says that he's going to appoint somebody that's going to gut Roe versus Wade and Obamacare, we should believe him. We also know enough about this president to be able to intuit that his game plan, at least, is to appoint someone who is going to give him a personally good outcome. I think that is something that we can take to the bank. The next question about whether Kavanaugh is going to flip and mold himself based on those waters is a slightly harder question. But based on his record, I see nothing in his record that would show to me, at least, that he would not expand presidential power to the benefit of this president, that he would not move forward a lot of the issues that Donald Trump thinks are really important. And as such, I think the president has essentially nominated his own savior.
His own savior. And Elise, I want to get your views, and we've had you on the show, of course, to talk about women's rights in this context, and we'll get to that. But first, take a listen to Chuck Schumer, again, out here, the person making this argument and leading on this idea that it's a kind of a corrupt choice.
He has said the president shouldn't be investigated. He's gone so far as to say a president, if he declares a law unconstitutional, doesn't have to obey it. How is he going to react if Mueller needs a subpoena, if Mueller needs some other action? He's probably the most extreme, and it wouldn't surprise me if that was very important to Donald Trump. Knowing Donald Trump, and I have no proof, do you think he didn't inquire about this either directly or indirectly, knowing Donald Trump?
Elise?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if Donald Trump's obsession with self-preservation and Mike Pence's obsession with controlling women had a love child, it would be Brett Kavanaugh. We have literally seen Mike Pence, right before I went on this show, doubling down on his desire to gut Roe versus Wade, criminalize abortion. At the same time, we know this president will do everything he can to avoid investigation and, as Senator Schumer said, expand his powers. I think these are complementary arguments. People care about an independent judiciary. They also care about women's capacity to have personal freedoms and freedom over our future. These aren't actually left positions. These are very mainstream American positions.
Right, that's certainly the case, especially if the Democrats sort of have a multi-pronged attack and explain what it means to overturn Roe throughout the land. Vince, obviously, all serious legal issues are adjudicated on The View, and that's where you'll find Alan Dershowitz. But although he has been very supportive of things that help the White House, he himself was not warm on this pick. Take a look at Alan Dershowitz on The View.
I wouldn't have nominated Kavanaugh. It wouldn't have been my choice.
Why?
He might have to recuse himself based on what he has previously written.
That is some traction for this recusal argument, and it could be the Supreme Court that ultimately has the final word if Mueller pushes it on whether this president has to go to the grand jury.
It might be. It might also be the first thing that Alan Dershowitz and I have ever agreed on in the history of jurisprudence. But I think it is an important piece, particularly around his Kavanaugh's love, his passionate love for expanding presidential power, particularly the presidential power of the president that he is employed by or that he has been nominated by.
Right. I mean, you're speaking to the point. There's the power theories, and you have those big debates. The court has held that, for example, in the war-making power, the drone power is not easy to question regardless of who's president. The Democrats are singling out that Kavanaugh didn't seem to feel as strongly about this when Bill Clinton was president.
No, that's definitely true. But I think we also have to expand it out to look at what presidential power does. So in the context of Guantanamo detainees and torture, actually Judge Kavanaugh was a judge on the Circuit Court of Appeals that dismissed a case that we had at the Center for Constitutional Rights with over 200 victims of torture in Abu Ghraib prison. This is a man who looks clearly at what he sees as the rules that are the most open and available to the president to be able to establish that kind of presidential power, really without regard of the human beings that it affects.
And the flip side, though, is that this is a respected, scholarly jurist who doesn't have any problem with his professional acumen, his ABA rating, anything like that.
Well, okay, fine. But the President of the United States promised that he was going to nominate a justice that would overturn Roe v. Wade, that would be hostile to administrative law generally, that would roll back all kinds of rights that are near and dear to many Americans, many of us here, right?
Yeah, Ari, I think we really need to dispense with the credentials argument as well as like he's a good carpool dad and a good soccer coach. Yeah. Everything is on the line with this nomination. It's about his ideology. It's about his willingness to break with his circuit court on crucial issues of constitutional rights, rights to abortion, but other rights as well, rights to contraception. And it's about whether he's going to be a rubber stamp for this president.
No question.
So the baseline arguments are irrelevant, and we need all of the senators to push hard on substance.
Well, and on that, and then I'll go back to Ellie, but on that, Elise, speak to his more, I would say, overruled, ultimately, views on, say, an immigrant who wanted to exercise the right to abortion, which a lot of people felt was a sign. If he would go that far in an appeals court, imagine him with life tenure on the Supreme Court. Right. What's your analysis of that?
Absolutely. I mean, he not only parted from his circuit court, but he wrote a very strongly worded dissent in arguing that a woman should be detained against her will after a court had ordered her release to terminated an unwanted pregnancy, a young undocumented woman. He also argued in a different dissent that, you know, the religious accommodation for contraception coverage in the ACA was not sufficient, even though all it meant meant was that people had to sign a form. Those are ideological positions. They run afoul of what most American people want. I mean, look, Kaiser Family Foundation had a poll out just 2 weeks ago that showed that 73% of self-identified independents want Roe versus Wade upheld. These senators have to think very, very carefully about what they're doing in this moment.
So, panel, hang with me. I want to now bring in as Providence Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who serves on the Judiciary Committee. Senator, thank you for joining us. If you've been listening to the spirited debate here, I will say on behalf of the panel, we have very talented lawyers. But if you ever watch Sesame Street, when they say one of these things is different than all the others, you have a vote. None of us do. Walk us through how you're exercising your vote and how you get to a majority to block this nominee if, as your colleagues have said, that's the goal.
First, I'm privileged to join this highly talented team of lawyers. I was a law clerk on the United States Supreme Court for Harry Blackmun the year after he wrote the majority opinion in Roe v. Wade. I've argued cases before the United States Supreme Court, 4 of them. I really regard this institution with reverence as well as respect. And what Donald Trump is doing, talk about partisan, is outsourcing and delegating this decision to right-wing fringe groups that are implementing, screening and vetting this nominee for the Trump litmus test, automatically overturn Roe v. Wade, cut back health care rights, disregard voting rights, civil rights. This court will be shaped for decades. What are we doing to stop this nomination? Well, of course, first, like good lawyers on the Judiciary Committee, we're doing a ton of research. And of course, what we've discovered is that this nominee is in favor of giving the president power to fire the special counsel who is investigating him, that he is in favor of vast expansion of presidential power when most Americans today want Donald Trump to be checked and bridled because he's out of control, personally, as well as in terms of authority. And of course, he has favored holding the Consumer Finance Protection Board unconstitutional. He doesn't like what it does, protecting consumers, but he thinks the president ought to have control over it. So these kinds of knowledge and facts are very, very relevant. And what we're going to do is make the case to the American people that he is not the right nominee, right-wing fringe, the product of a corrupt process, and a president who has made himself the puppet of these groups. And look at how relevant these issues are right now. Rudy Giuliani on Sunday said the president ought to continue to have pardon power. Who will determine whether President Trump can pardon himself or his cronies? The swing vote, this nominee. Who will determine whether he has to comply with a subpoena from the special counsel? This nominee. And he must, absolutely must, recuse himself. That is a bare minimum that my colleagues should insist on him doing.
So when you say make the case to the American people, we've heard Chuck Schumer say that, is that basically an outside-in strategy, that you say that to the American people and you get enough pressure on people like Collins or Murkowski to come back around? I mean, walk us through for viewers who are saying, okay, I hear the Democrats have woken up, but it feels to some people, we've heard the argument, years late. And what is the strategy to get to 51 votes here?
The strategy is to take this case to the American people, just as we did on the Affordable Care Act, when really nobody gave us a chance of fending off the Trump attack on health care. Here we have the same issues where Donald Trump has named someone who will be the key vote on eliminating many of the protections under the Affordable Care Act, including the protection for millions of Americans who suffer from pre-existing conditions. Will take us back to the darkest days in this country when abortion was criminalized, women were prosecuted, women died, women were denied access to contraception and the morning after pill. These kinds of facts will arouse and enrage the American people just as they did on health care. And that's the case we're going to make. And the same tools, the same means are necessary to give the American people voice and to persuade our colleagues. They're going to have to answer to history. This vote will be remembered long after everything else is forgotten, including the next election.
I think that is certainly true, at least according to the tenure of most members of the court. Senator Blumen. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.